Writers, today you are going to reread your story. You're going to ask yourself this question: what is the most exciting, the most important, or the most interesting part of your story? Let's go ahead and take this book for example. The Relatives Came. Let's go ahead and we're going to listen to a read aloud to kind of refresh our memories of this short story. And I want you to ask yourself as you listen to the story, what is the most important or exciting part of this story?
The Relatives Came by Cynthia Rylant and illustrated by Stephen Gamble. It was summer of the year when the relatives came. They came up from Virginia. They left when their grapes were nearly purple enough to pick, but not quite. They had an old station wagon that smelled like a real car, and in it they put an ice chest full of soda pop and some boxes of crackers and some bologna sandwiches, and up they came from Virginia. They left at 4 in the morning when it was still dark, before even the birds were awake. They drove all day long and into the night, and while they traveled along they looked at the strange houses and different mountains and thought about their almost purple grapes back home. They thought about Virginia, but they thought about us too, waiting for them. So they drank up all their pop and ate up all their crackers and traveled up all those miles until finally they pulled into our yard. Then it was hugging time. Talk about hugging! Those relatives just passed us all around their car, pulling us against their wrinkled Virginia clothes, crying sometimes. They hugged us for hours. Then it was into the house, and so much laughing and shining faces and hugging in the doorways. You'd have to go through at least 4 different hugs to get from the kitchen to the front room. Those relatives! And finally, after a big supper 2 or 3 times around, until we all got a turn at the table, there was quiet talk, and we were in 2s and 3s through the house. The relatives weren't particular about beds, which was good, since there weren't any extras, so a few squeezed in with us, and the rest slept on the floor, some with their arms thrown over the closest person, or some with an arm across one person and a leg across another. It was different going to sleep with all that new breathing in the house. The relatives stayed for weeks and weeks. They helped us tend the garden, and they fixed any broken things they could find. They ate up all our strawberries and melons, then promised we could eat up all their grapes and peaches when we came to Virginia. But none of us thought about Virginia much. We were so busy hugging and eating and breathing together. Finally, after a long time, the relatives loaded up their ice chest and headed back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. We stood there in our pajamas and waved them off in the dark. We watched the relatives disappear down the road, then we crawled back into our beds that felt too big and too quiet. We fell asleep. And the relatives drove on, all day long and into the night. And while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and different mountains, and they thought about their dark purple grapes waiting at home in Virginia. But they thought about us, too, missing them, and they missed us. And when they were finally home in Virginia, they crawled into their silent, soft beds and dreamed about next summer.
So, my friends, my next question for you is, so what was the most important part of that story? Well, of course, the most important part was the visit from the family. Not the car trip there or the car trip back. Those were definitely not the most important parts of the story. And that's why the author of The Relatives Came moves really quickly through time in the beginning and the end of the story and spends multiple pages developing the visit. Now, this is where you try. Take out your personal narrative small moment. And what I want you to do is I want you to quickly reread it. When you reread your personal narrative small moment, I want you to think to yourself, what is the most important, exciting, or interesting part of this story that I have written? I want you to take out a red crayon for me. With your red crayon, you're going to draw a box, kind of like this box right here. Do you see this one? You're going to draw a box with that red crayon around the part of your story that best shows the reader what's most important. And then after you do that, I want you to come meet me at the white table once you have finished putting a box around your personal narrative, small moments, most important part. And we're going to talk about how we can stretch it out together. Go ahead and get started.